Welcome back to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Today we are starting a new series on how to grow, and I thought it would be a great idea to bring in someone from the community who's been a longtime follower of the Grand Solar Minimum. We have Jesse here today, and he's going to help us basically just give us some good tips and talk about what he's growing and everything like that. But first, let's get a little information. I'd like to get to know Jesse a little bit. Jesse, how you doing today?
Not too bad. How are you doing, Jake?
Pretty good considering everything. Hey, listen, before we get started into this program today, I'd like to get a little background on yourselves. Won't you tell us about yourself and what your background is?
Well, my name's Jesse, and I grew up in rural Wisconsin, up in northern Wisconsin. Grew up on a dairy farm. Uh, we milked at any time between 20 and 75 cows. Uh, Family gardened. We raised chickens for meat, never for eggs, funny enough.
Hmm.
But about the age of 13, my mom was in a car accident, and I took over doing all the gardening for the family myself. And I've been gardening for 29 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and love gardening. Went to college, did an undergraduate in food science, and took a bunch of horticulture classes, and got my master's in horticulture.
Nice.
So horticulture is just the growing of high value commercial plants. So versus agronomy, which is the growing of field crops like grains and that.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of crossover, but it's definitely focused more on the fruits and the vegetables and oh, other stuff in that realm.
Right. So you live in northern Wisconsin, or rural Wisconsin, obviously.
Yep.
A lot of it's probably rural up there, but with the kind of climate you guys have, and I'm not saying it's like an ice cube up there or anything like that, but do certain things in your garden do better up there versus other? Like, do you have to like? I guess what I'm asking is, when you start your garden, um, are you aware of the type of seeds that you could start during the climate that you have in your area? Just basic stuff like how did you? What am I trying to say here?
What do I grow? When do I grow it? Why do I grow it? Right?
Yeah, basically, like what obviously you said you love gardening, so this is something that I think is one of those things where people can fall in love doing it, and if you don't have the passion for it, you probably shouldn't be doing it anyway. But yeah, what do you grow up there, and is it just that region that is in particular those crops, or are these really good starter gardening crops that anyone can do?
Well, the things I grow, you can basically grow practically everywhere. You just have to be conscientious of your varieties that you're growing. Some varieties are really forgiving. They're short day. Others require longer days. And with a lot of those things that require longer days, basically you have to have started seedlings. And you can start your own. You can buy them from a greenhouse. You can contract them from a greenhouse. And I have done all of those things. Even right now, as I'm starting my own seedlings, I have seedlings that are being grown at a local greenhouse that I contracted, and I get a very good rate for buying bulk seedlings. I did farmers market for a number of years and uh, did about an acre and a half, 2 acres of vegetables.
Oh
So
goodness.
yeah, I've long line of market growers in my family. I have two aunts that do farmers market. My grandmother did farmers market. Her brother still does farmers markets out in Massachusetts. So cute story. A person came to the local area, and they were from Massachusetts. Said to my grandmother, "This is just like the sweet corn that I would get out east." And he happened to buy sweet corn from my great uncle out there. So it's it's that small world. So basically everything in North America is pretty consistent. You're going to have some regional variations, but around here, it's one of the more lesser forgiving environments. I mean, we
Right.
just had freezing cold temperatures last night. Our last frost day is somewhere between May 11th and May 26th. So we have that risk. And we've had freezes in June that I remember as a kid.
Oh
I mean,
wow.
we've lost our apple blossoms, and I've went out and I filled barrels with water to have heat sinks so I could have the heat radiating back out to keep them from freezing. So
Oh wow.
yeah, that was about 6, 7 years ago we had that. So it's unpredictable, and that's kind of part of the fun, and it's part of the joy and the struggle. And don't worry about loving it or not for the garden. The more you do something, the more you interact with it, the more likely you are to love something. So, yes, start with something and it grows.
So you said you grew a garden, an acre worth of vegetables. Is that is that for you? Are you canning all that? Are you selling it at a farmer's market? That's a pretty impressive sized garden.
Yeah, I've done both, and the drought year of 2013, I grew about a just under an acre garden, so it was about 3/4 of an acre. And we ended up canning everything in that 3/4 of an acre garden. So it was about 150 by 150-foot garden. I had that double fenced in to keep the deer out. The first time I actually ever fenced the garden to keep the deer out.
Oh wow.
And I was amazed at how much deer browse I actually suffered over the years because the amount of green beans that we had was incredible. So I did have 5 rows that were about 150 feet long of green beans planted. But we canned enough green beans that we had over 200 quarts of green beans and about the same number of pints of green beans canned. And even right now, I'm still eating tomato sauce that we canned in 2013.
Awesome.
So something to think about. If you're concerned about food, you pick the vegetables that you can can, and canning in glass jars uh, allows for food to be stable for a good number of years. Now, there's a little bit of deterioration at the top of the tomato sauce. Pour that off, and no issue. And if you're ever worried about that, just make sure you bring everything to a good boil for a
True.
few minutes, and that will take care of the concerns that people would have with canned food.
So I guess whenever you hear and you follow Grand Solar Minimum topics and other channels as well, and we hear a lot in the community about growing, and it's got to grow your own food, got to grow your own food. And I always picture like the garden out at my grandparents' house at their farm wasn't that big. It wasn't no acre, but it produced a lot of vegetables, which we ate a lot of during the summer. My grandmother cooked with fresh vegetables all summer long. But I guess when we're talking about Grand Solar Minimum and other situations where it's important to grow your own food because there could be an issue down the road, um, you really, I mean, you have an acre of garden of vegetables growing. Is it necessary for something that big if you're canning? And can you produce enough food for a family of 4 or 5 on a garden that would be smaller than an acre? Because now I never really thought about this until I just started talking to you. But when you said you have about an acre that you grow vegetables, and I'm thinking, wow, okay, well that makes sense on how you would have enough food to to rely off of if you had it in a big quantity versus just your normal size garden that maybe your grandma tinkers in.
Hmm.
So that's kind of a loaded question, but I guess what I'm saying is you're sounds like you're set up pretty good if you're growing that much.
Well, in some respects, yes, but uh, we just moved out to a new place, and I have yet to bring a tractor over to use here of my own. So I'm kind of relying on neighbors to work land, and I have a smaller garden right now within my larger garden that I grew last year. So part of my garden last year I mulched with cardboard, and I used that for killing off the weeds, and I planted tomatoes within that. Actually, I've done a garden where I've planted over 100 tomato plants in cardboard and straw, and it makes for a very easy, efficient way of starting a garden. But this year, I really wanted greens this spring, so I pulled the cardboard back, and I had all the soil that was underneath there, and I
Oh wow.
planted my greens in the soil where I had planted my tomatoes the previous year. And I took some chicken wire and I put it around there because rabbits were the bane of my garden last year. And actually, this winter, they were the bane of my garden. The 4 apple trees we planted last year were completely girdled, where the rodents ate all the bark off the bottom of the trees, and they died. So right now I made some cuttings and I did some grafts and got some root tone, some cytokinin, trying to get them to root. And those are in the garage in a big pot of vermiculite perlite that I keep moist. So we'll see if that turns out. But it forced me to get back into doing some grafting and some cuttings, and I hadn't done that for a while. And while I had all the root tone, I took some raspberry plants and I made about 20 raspberry cuttings. So it's that now. That's definitely stuff that I picked up when I was taking the horticulture classes, doing the cuttings, doing the graftings. We had our lab for class, and we did cuttings and graftings. And a raspberry plant, you can literally break off a raspberry, stick it in the soil, and you're very likely to have that root. And with raspberries, you can even bend the tips down, put the tips in a pot of soil or in the ground, and they will self-root, and you'll be able to propagate and have more raspberry plants. They're a very forgiving plant like that.
Going back to something you said earlier, that you actually have paid for seedlings. Now, to get started, is that something that most people do that have a bigger garden than your just typical? I mean, that seems pretty convenient, having someone getting them started for you.
Yeah, actually, it's very common. And most of the people that do market gardening, they will contract out a portion of their growth of plugs or started seedlings, and use multiple greenhouses. My aunt, she does 27 acres plus of garden right now.
Oh, wow.
Of
Oh, my
vegetables.
goodness.
Yep. Her husband thought when he saw how much she was making on the garden, he's like, yeah, we're going to focus on doing market garden. And they use 2 different local greenhouses for growing. And they buy tens of thousands of started seedlings, and they have greenhouses grow for them. And we have a large number of people that do market gardening and farmers market in the area, and that do CSAs, because we're within the Twin Cities metro area. So we're an hour and a half outside of the Twin Cities.
Okay.
And we provide vegetables to that community. And there's some larger communities on the border of the Twin Cities, which are technically metro area, which have farmers markets, and 2 of them my grandmother started. So it's kind of fun to have that history. And we have one place that I use is we have a local seed shop in the Twin Cities that has a large farm, but they basically supply seeds for market growers, and it's a very bare bones and like an old feed store counter where you go up there with your order, and then they fill your order and they bring it out to you.
Okay.
And even right now with the lockdown, they fill your order. So I got hooked up, going back to the greenhouses, I got hooked up with the greenhouses through my aunt. And for the last 9 years, I've had them growing flats of vegetables for me, and even flowers. So I introduced my wife to the concept that you can have like a flat of 120 pre-started flowers for yourself of one variety or another. And it's kind of fun just to play with that. And I mean, for a 128-pound plug tray, last year it was about $17 for 120.
That seems like a reasonable price.
It's incredibly reasonable, because I was just at a greenhouse last week and ran into the cities, picked up my order of vegetable seeds, and 2 weekends ago. My gosh, time flies. But one tomato plant at a greenhouse was $3, or 4 for like $2 to $3 in the smaller trays. So when you're buying in bulk, you get a little bit of a bonus. And if you get together with a group of friends or neighbors, you can contract with a greenhouse, have them grow the vegetable plugs for you, and then you can divide them among friends. And like yet last year, I gave my mom a 120 vegetable plants to plant in her garden, and it
Nice.
was like, yeah, it was practically an afterthought. It didn't even affect what I was growing.
Jeez. Um, you were talking that you've moved, so obviously you haven't. It sounds like you haven't gotten back into planting an acre's worth of vegetables. So I guess what when you did have that going, what kind of vegetables were you planting in an acre, just to get an idea?
Okay, well, an acre of vegetables, uh, and especially for market growing, you kind of look for what potentially can be your niche, what you can grow well, because if there's a niche but you can't grow it, it's not of value.
Right.
I grew a lot of tomatoes because I have fun with tomatoes, and I'll talk about something I did in the past, which was a little crazy with tomatoes. Uh, I grew sweet corn. Now, sweet corn is pretty good, and growing up, we always grew sweet corn, and we would be that truck on the roadside selling sweet corn. So I have that experience growing up. So most people
Love
that have
sweet
a
corn.
farm have grown sweet corn and done the roadside selling at one point or another, and that's kind of a fun rural thing. Uh, and the prices haven't really shifted that much, and depending on the season, the prices vary a lot. So, like sweet corn during a drought year, if you have sweet corn, you can basically name your price. And during a drought, it's really easy to name your price on vegetables. And or if you have something earlier. One thing with my other location my family farm where I grew up, it was sand going to clay soil, and the upper sandy hills. I was able to get potatoes or new red potatoes like 2 weeks earlier than anyone else in the area. Also because I was not trying to maximize my yield, but I was trying to maximize my time frame. And I could basically make $5 per linear foot of planted potatoes. So
Oh wow.
that was pretty good for just selling those little new potatoes in a quart flat box. And then after I picked the potatoes, I was able to leave the plants in, let them regrow potatoes. In some areas, I planted green beans. I was able to double crop in northern Wisconsin on new potatoes and green beans in
Wow.
my garden. I was very happy with that. So that's one thing a person can do in their garden space is if you're doing like red potatoes for new potatoes, you're not going to get the biggest yield of potatoes, but you get that very special crop of new potatoes, and then you can plant beans in there, and it helps restore the soil because potatoes are a very demanding crop. They can take a lot out of the soil, and beans are a very giving crop. They have a sorted or associated mycorrhiza or bacteria that grow with the roots that take nitrogen from the air and make it bioavailable in the soil. And so you don't need to fertilize beans, and beans and other legumes will fertilize the soil. So that's kind of one of those little interesting things. But again, I got off track on the
That's
plants.
all
But
right. That's all right. There's a lot to go over. I mean, it's not, it's to me, I always just watching my grandparents as a kid working in the garden. I thought, well, that's easy. You just get a hoe and you do this and you do that and water the garden and the stuff grows. And there's a lot to it. So it's definitely appreciated that you're getting a little in depth and detailed about some of this stuff. Um, with that being said, now I'm not sure. I haven't talked to you a lot off the air personally, so I'm just going into this blind. But um, canning and shelf life. What
Mhm.
what what are the best vegetables to grow for canning and shelf life?
Well, for canning, basically high acid foods are usually the best for canning. So a good safe spot for everyone to start with canning is tomatoes and for tomato sauce.
Okay.
And having tomato sauce on hand is a really easy way to use your pasta reserves or your rice reserves or your beans. Tomatoes, dry beans, you have chili. So you,
I'm smiling right now because when the pandemic started, Mari and I have been following the situation since January, and so little by little each week, Mari would buy a little bit of extra canned goods, this and that, and I was looking the other day in the basement, and we've got 3 cases of tomato sauce. I'm like, what is up with all this tomato sauce? But not thinking about, we've got plenty of beans, we've got plenty of rice, and
Mhm.
so that makes total sense. That tomato sauce most definitely is pretty much the glue of most meals anyway. So
Mhm.
that made me laugh when you mentioned tomato sauce is the cornerstone because you're right. Just ask Mari. Like I said, she bought like 3 cases of tomato sauce, and you talked about pasta reserves. We stocked up on pasta as well. So very interesting. Didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I wanted to share that
No.
because now it made me giggle why I couldn't figure out why Mari had bought so much tomato sauce. Now I know.
Well, and there's actually one variety of tomato sauce that comes in an actual canning jar that you can reuse for canning, and it's a it's a nice upper mid-level sauce, but it's not too pricey. And at Walmart, you can buy 2 jars for under $4,
Oh, that's
and
good.
then you have two canning jars. You need to get a different lid than the one that comes with it, but it makes for a yeah. When I buy pasta sauce, I'm like, that one has a jar I can reuse and I can can it. So actually, it's it's not beside me, but I've been using one for a drinking jar for the last little while. So
Nice.
yeah,
Well,
and
that's country,
well,
isn't it?
it's very country, and the old timers, everyone that went through the Great Depression, they did not let things go to waste. And I grew up with grandparents that went through the Great Depression, and I was fascinated by that as a child. So that's another thing in my background. I mean, how many 7-year-olds are fascinated by the Great Depression and they're worried that in 75 years after the previous Great Depression, there might be another one? And
Yeah.
it's like trying to learn as much as you can to get ready for the next Great Depression because it was like, it was so disruptive for my grandparents and their families. I don't want that to happen to
No.
mine. And to kind of have like the Great Recession, or to have this lockdown and potential economic disruption that's going to go on with that, and to hear people talking about that, it's like, yeah, it's not a bad thing that I grew up with that mentality and I was exposed to the people that didn't throw things away. I had both grandparents that had a drawer in the kitchen that was full of bread bags and twist
Oh,
ties.
nice.
Or you grow up with the grandparents and they washed out the Ziploc bags.
Yep. Yep.
It's
They'd
like,
they'd put them in the dishwasher, believe it or not, and let them dry out on the racks. Wouldn't run the dishwasher, but
yep,
they would wash them out, clean them out, and then throw them in the dishwater to let them dry. And I always thought, wow, you guys are really cheap. But like you said, these are these are people that came from a generation that really struggled. And Jesse, you might be a frequent guest on this program because I don't see how we're going to avoid any kind of situation that we've already had, the Great Depression. It does look like that we could head into that right now economically, just with everything that's going on. So I think it's really important for not just for grand solar minimum purposes, but to have these kind of conversations, real people like yourself who know what they're doing. This is to me this kind of talk right here is worth gold because again, if you had a passion to learn about the Great Depression, just for the simple fact that it intrigued you at that time period, but also you want to be able to pass that knowledge on to your family so maybe you don't have to get hit quite as hard during the next one, which unfortunately I feel like that we're inevitably going to see something similar to that here in the near future, unfortunately.
well, it's cyclic, and it seems like every 75 years there was
Yes.
a trend to Great Depression.
Yes.
So,
And you said
and
it.
then
Cyclic.
it, yep, and learning about the grand solar minimum and the solar cycles and the and even the Milankovitch cycle. There's so many
Oh
cycles
man.
that you learn about even taking botany classes or other classes about cladistics, or what was it? It was biogeography. I took a biogeography class, and that was very interesting on the movement and the shifts of climate, the long-term cycles that led to the current distribution of plant life and climates in this world. And that was an eye opener too. That there's a lot of sharing of plant life up in the northern hemisphere, but around the southern hemisphere, there are incredibly unique, isolated pockets of plant life that are only in these small zones where they're still able to grow. You know,
And
it,
that
it,
and that brings me to another question you popped in my head as far as growing goes. You live in the northern part of America, uh, up near Canadian border, close to it anyway. Are you concerned with the upcoming grand solar minimum about growing what you grow now? Have you considered moving, or do you know enough about what you're doing that you know how to make it work?
well, I mean, I've had good years and bad years, and I just kind of think it will probably be a high potential of a bad year. And working on growing stuff now while it's decent to have enough
Yes.
to tide through. That is the big thing. And just like having that garden where I'm eating 7-year-old tomato sauce, kind of think about the story of Jacob in the Bible, where the Pharaoh had a dream and it's going to be 7 bad years, or 7 good years and 7 bad years. They took time in the 7 good years to put away the food for the 7 bad years. So it's like right now, I mean, things are not great, but they are relatively good to how bad they can be.
I'm glad you said that because there's a lot of people out there in this community that try to communicate to our viewers and listeners that if you're not growing food right now, that's it. It's too late for you. You know, you better hope for the best. And I'm glad to hear you say this period of time right now because you're right. This is where we perfect our trade. This is where we get ready for potential bad seasons. We had a pretty bad plant last year. Crops all over the Midwest struggled a little bit. This year seems to be a little bit different, according to some of these crop reports. I'm seeing some states are planting way faster than they did last year, and they're even beating their 5-year average. So there is some good news right now, and like you said, it's not as bad as it's going to get down the road. So this is where we really need to stop talking about planting gardens and get that plan going right now. And so this is for me. Mari and I are trying something different. We're growing some stuff indoors, and we're
Hmm.
going to see how that works. Now we have a very, very, very small operation, but at the same time, we're new to this, so we didn't want to dump a bunch of money into this first time and then mess it all up at the same time. So I guess my next question is going to be, um, what is a comfortable amount for a beginning person who's going to try to grow food for his family? What do you think is a comfortable start for people? I mean, is there ever too much work to put on yourself, or is there just a right amount?
Well, and it really depends on the time you have, the space you have, and your physical health. Those all affect how much garden a person can do. But if you have like lesser physical health, if you have a weakness, you're not able to be out and do as much. But if you have more time, you're able to have more space. Uh, or one thing you can always do with a garden is you start more and you just learn to let stuff go. And that's one of the things I learned with market gardening. One of the things they teach is you don't have to be so precious with all your plants.
Gotcha.
You can learn to say, oh, I couldn't keep up with the weeding of this patch of my garden. I'm going to ignore it, or I'm going to mow it off, or I'm going to plow it under. And then you just let it go. It's not worth the effort if you don't have enough. But if the year demands more, or you're able to put the effort in, it's like that drought garden being so good because I irrigated it, and during the drought we didn't have as much haying on the farm and other stuff, so I was able to focus on it more. So lockdown, you have more time. You can put more time
There
in
you
the
go.
garden. Uh, But right now, starting a garden, some of the easy ways. When I first came to this house, I did a garden on my front porch, and I did it all in pots. I had no ground broken. The first year here, I just gardened in pots. So, and some of that was finding planters on auctions, going to garage sales, buying planters, dumpster diving. People would throw away broken plastic totes, and I would use those for planters.
Good
So,
ideas. Good ideas.
yep, do not be afraid to dumpster dive for materials. I mean, I'm a yeah, I'm a great, the whole story of the Great Depression and that. It's like
Right.
people right now throw away so much stuff. If you have access to dumpster dive, oh my gosh, please do it. I have gotten $1,000 vacuum cleaners out of the dumpster. I have, my wife is annoyed with it, but I have gotten numerous televisions out of the dumpster and flat screen TVs. It's just like, yeah, oh, and that's just they got a bigger TV. I'm dumpster diving that one.
I'm gonna have to talk to your wife one time about your TV habits then,
Yep,
just to
yep.
see how annoyed
Well,
she is.
there's one upstairs, and I just recently dumpster dove another one. So, but
Hey, I mean, look, this is all about consumption and not being wasteful. You're going to learn that. Well, I'm sure you have, but people will learn that when they do their research on grand solar minimum. That maybe if there wasn't so much waste, people would have had more supply. I think it's neat that people can go out and take the time and dumpster dive, as you call it. I call it a scavenger hunt. But I think it's neat that if you have the ability to make something work right, and you can fix it, and and it works out, great. If it doesn't, you get rid of it, obviously. But we're going to have to learn how, especially if we're approaching Great Depression times, we're going to have to learn how to consume less, recycle, and I'm not just talking about to save the planet, but reuse things like buying tomato sauce that has a jar that you can reuse. Just get a different lid for it. So I like your answer though about what kind of workload is too much. If you start with a big garden and you feel like you don't have the time or the resources to tend to the entire thing, then you let some go or you mow it down or whatnot, and then you manage the area that you feel comfortable doing. So I really like that answer. It's okay to go big, and you could always adjust as it's like a moving goalpost basically almost.
exactly. And then as the year changes, you can, it's like, oh, I need more. You break some more ground, or you lay out some cardboard and you plant your tomatoes or your squash in it. I'm about to sneeze.
It's all right.
Hmm.
We'll
Oh, no
leave,
worries.
we'll leave that in the video. Just
I,
kidding.
it took some time to fight off the sneeze, but
And now it's gone
yeah,
for now.
now it's gone. But I mean, right now with all the shipping, using newspaper and cardboard to start a garden. If you are first time gardening and you got ground, you don't have equipment to break the ground, mulch it. Mulch it with layers of cardboard overlapping about 6 inches and newspaper, and
On the
wet that
ground.
down. And if you got, yeah, just straight on the ground, and that you do a basically a killing mulch, a suffocating mulch, and that will kill off the plants underneath it. And you can plant in that your first year. If you have something like straw or grass clippings or other bark chips, that haven't been treated in that, or even sticks or broken up debris you find around the yard and rake up, and you put it on top of that to hold it down and keep and to have a place for the moisture to infiltrate. That makes a very nice start for a first garden.
How long does that usually
And
take?
well, so within 1 year's time, everything under it will be clean. But with it, the moment you put it down and it's wetted down, you can cut a hole in it and you can plant in that hole.
Okay.
And so I've actually growing up, that was my one of my favorite ways to grow tomatoes is on cardboard and straw. My father worked at a food plant, and he would bring in these pallet slip sheets that were about 4 by 4 or 4 by 8, and I would lay out these sheets of cardboard on the ground, and I would plant my vegetables or my tomatoes into that and my peppers because it kept the water from splashing up. Now that's a really interesting thing with tomatoes and other solanaceous crops. There's an issue with late blight, early blight, and so late blight is oomycete, and it's basically a slime mold, and it's the Irish potato famine was caused by an oomycete, and it splashes from the ground, it gets on the plant leaves, and is transferred that way. So if you have the ground underneath mulched, you don't have the splash up of soil, and you can keep down a lot of disease issues. So that with tomatoes is a great start. Start with tomatoes if you like tomatoes. Another thing, grow what you like. Yeah, you don't have to grow something if you don't like it. You may try it, but grow what you like because it's pointless to grow food you're not going to eat.
Exactly.
That's just wasteful.
And we were just talking about that. If you're going to put all that time and effort and labor into it, grow things that you like. We don't want to be wasteful. You want to consume what you like. Me, myself, I got to really get in gear about vegetables. I'm not a vegetable lover, but I do like peas. I do like
Hmm.
carrots. There are things that I know I'm going to be heavy on peas in my garden. I'm going to be heavy on green beans in my garden just because those are two vegetables I know I can eat. And I'd love to be able to grow sweet corn. Now, maybe I'll have to have a couple more. Well, I know we're going to do more series on this on growing. So, but I'd love to be able to grow corn up here. Just not
Hmm.
sure if that's going to be possible. The last 2 years, where I'm at here in upstate New York, the climate has just been terrible for growing. And last year we started seeds, nothing happened. Nothing
Uh,
at all happened. The soil was awful. Even on the little trays that we had to start the seeds, if it wasn't the squirrels, then it was just the temperature. Nothing's cooperating. So this year, we did buy some indoor stuff to grow, and so far so good. I'm kind of like
Excellent.
I'm like happy. I'm making it grow. Look, it's growing. So there is a self accomplishment feeling when you start a garden. And I'm 42 years old. I've been a researcher of climate for a long time. I have hobbies like playing guitar and hanging out with my son and throwing the ball here and there and doing stuff like that. So I never would have imagined myself being excited to check on the plants that are growing. Hey, look, they grew again. This is great. I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is if a guy like me from the Midwest who grew up in urban areas can get into gardening, I guess really anybody could do this. And it's almost addictive in a way. Like you can't wait to see the results here in a few days, what's going on, how it's doing in its climate. So I'm excited to get this going this year. Last year, like I said, we didn't have very good luck. This year, we're already getting results, and it's the second week of May. Last year, I mean, the temperatures. I mean, this year the temperatures are acting the same way. Actually, we're finally going to get 60-degree weather starting tomorrow, and it doesn't look like we're going to look back after that. It looks like spring will actually finally arrive here in the Northeast. But I guess with you, as far as you've grown for several years now, you get bad years and you get good years.
hmm
You're eating tomatoes from 7 years ago, tomato sauce. So it has to
Yep.
be somewhat good for you so far. But if you wouldn't mind, just kind of elaborate, like, because I'm new to all this. So if I was to can some green beans, how long can I keep green beans on the shelf?
Well, I hate to say it, but we 7 years you'll have beans that will last. If the canning's done right, that seems to be where things kind of top out.
Okay.
And 7 years seems to be as far as that. I have 11-year-old canned pears, and they started to get a little alcoholic there was a little alcohol in the pears.
Uh oh.
But you'll see some oxidation on the seal. So the seal is a rubber gasket, and I mean, it's not perfect. There's no real perfect seal anywhere in the food industry. I mean, you will have some migration of oxygen across any barrier that's there, and you will have an oxidative reaction on the top of that. Even on the sauerkraut, I'm actually eating 7-year-old sauerkraut right now that we canned, and there's some oxidation on the top. I pulled the oxidized sauerkraut off the top, and I'll eat the sauerkraut. Uh, so, well,
So
canned
in
green
other
beans.
words, don't be a wuss. Just get it off the top and go for it.
Right, exactly. And if it smells off, throw it away.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to throw it away. We're not at that point in
No.
time, and we don't ever risk your health on something you're not sure of. And the big there's things that can get you sick, and there's things that can kill you that can happen if there's like a failure. But if oxygen gets into a can, you don't have to worry about the one big one for taking you out for a disease, because that one uh, basically has heat resistant spores, and all canning is basically based around Clostridium botulinum. So this is me in my food science undergrad degree.
There you go.
Uh, Basically, you're looking for a 12 log value kill on any canned good, and the and that's basically to well, 10 to the 12th power is a quadrillion. Uh, yeah, yeah, no billion, trillion. So you're to take if there was a trillion cells, you cooked it to a 12D kill, you would have one cell left.
Okay, my head hurts, but continue.
Yes.
You're definitely
So
getting
I
in
mean
some
that
science here.
yeah, so all canning the canning times are all to get that
Okay.
12 log value kill on your canned food. And that's why they recommend pressure canning on things that are solid foods, and they recommend pressure canning on things that are uh, low acid. And
Okay.
that is a safety factor because you're able to have a higher temperature. And the log it's a time temperature thing. Most things in life are time and temperature.
Oh yeah.
And time, temperature, and movement, because there's the agitation. And that goes even with cleaning. It's all about time, temperature, and agitation. And in cleaning, you have the chemicals. So those are all 4 variables. And canning is the 3 variables of time, temperature, and agitation within your canned medium. So like sauces and high acid sauces, they have the advantage of being fluid. So there will be a convection within the jar where the heat will rise up through the center and go down the sides. The coldest spot in a fluid canned jar is center cylindrical in the jar and about 1/3 of the way from the bottom because of the cycling of the fluid in there. So when they do the measurement of temperature in a canning system in a fluid, they go from about 1/3 from the bottom, and that's the coldest point. So they are setting up the standards for canning is based on that in a fluid. On a
So,
solid, oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
In a solid, it's in the dead center because that's the slowest point for the heat to basically conduct through it. So it's not convective; it's conductive heat transfer. Uh, so that's like the old timers would can squash,
Gotcha.
and that's a solid. And that's why a lot of things with like the meat and all that, there's people push the pressure canning because it's solid. You're not going to have the convection within there, so you're going to have that lower likelihood of the heat at the coldest point reaching that 12D kill. And that's a very important thing with that is just to make sure the coldest point gets that heat time. So I hate to say it, my family has never pressure canned. We've always done a boiling bath canning, and that is not current USDA recommended for low acid food.
Gotcha.
But so there's things that a person can do, and there's things that people are recommended to do.
Gotcha. And speaking of temperature, when you're canning and when you're done canning, what is the preferred climate condition that you want to store these cans of vegetables? What would be the preferred temperature for these things to be sitting in, as far as like if they're on a shelf? What temperature range are we talking here?
Well, a cool, dry place. So you and stable. I
Okay.
mean, because if the so cool and dry, the dryness prevents the corrosion on the lid. The coolness, basically, all microbiological processes are temperature influenced. So at lower temperatures, the rates of anything microbiological or even chemical are slower. So even if you take all the microbiological activity out of a system by killing it, by canning, canning is basically a kill step to kill everything in there. There's still chemical reactions that are happening in there. And that's that oxidation, that degradation that's happening within there. So by lowering the temperature, you're slowing the rate. And a lot of times, that classic basement of being like 50, 60 degrees is an optimal environment. And to have light out of the system, you want it dark. I mean, because light provides light oxidation,
Gotcha.
and that puts energy into the system, and it just pushes the oxidative process along. So light oxidation is very common in food products and produces a lot of off flavors and losses of nutritive value. So, I mean, light is a good sanitizer, but you don't want it sanitizing your vitamins out of your food.
Sounds good.
For everyone else that's listening, let me give them a few quick tips to
Sure.
kind of push you along. One thing we had talked about doing is right now, if you're on lockdown, it's hard to get seeds. Uh, One easy place you can get seeds is the vegetables you have. Like here, just a butternut squash. All the squash that you find in the supermarket, except for the summer squash, all winter type squash, you can take the seeds out of and plant them. I literally went to the supermarket, bought this squash
Smart.
because I wanted butternut squash seeds. So I'm going to eat the squash and I'm going to plant the
There
seeds.
you go.
Yep. I mean, there's a plate of dry seeds from another squash that I just did.
Nice.
Uh, I also save seeds from tomatoes. You can take the tomatoes at the grocery store. If you don't have an opportunity to get seeds, you can save those seeds. They may not be the perfect variety for growing in your environment, but you have an opportunity to plant them out and at least get something. One of the simplest ways to save tomato seeds is I use paper toweling. And I just take the locular jelly, that gel that's in there with the seeds. I put that between two pieces of paper toweling. I let that dry out, and I plant the seeds. You
Okay.
can you can do the whole fermentation thing where you put it in a jar with water, you let it ferment, take the scum off, and you have a much cleaner seed. But when you ferment it in paper toweling, you so this is a little bit ugly and dark, but you can just tear off the little portions
Right.
with the seed and plant it, and it's like a already pre-made seed tape, and the paper towel helps draw moisture in for the seeds. So, and then it's easier to handle smaller seeds.
Okay.
Another spot to get seeds is tomatillos. Now, this one just started to dry out a little bit, but this is from my garden from last year, and this has been sitting in my laundry room, and it's an intact tomatillo that they store great. And actually, yeah, butternut squash store great. You can keep these at room temperature in your house for about 5, 6, 7 months. I kept squash for a year
Wow.
as regular squash, and then I planted the seeds out the next year just in the house. So if you're thinking about things that are good for survival, squash, you don't have to refrigerate. Tomatillos, you
Ah.
don't have to refrigerate.
Okay.
Tomatoes, you don't really have to refrigerate tomatoes. We will pick tomatoes in the fall that are green, and we will have tomatoes into January. We just set them on newspaper and cardboard boxes, stem side down, and we pick out the ones that are spoiling as we go. But we will have tomatoes into January.
Wow. Yeah, Mari does.
So
I never seen Mari put tomatoes in the fridge, so we do the same thing here. And you got me thinking too when you're talking about vegetables that you can take the seeds from to start your garden with. A couple other things. celery and carrots as well are another
Hmm.
easy starter. Mari just showed me this year how that works, so I was super impressed with that myself. So
Right, and those are Apiaceae, they're biannuals, so the stuff you have has already gone through their first growth year,
hmm
and you could take the carrot breeding program at the university. They would save the top 4 or 5 inches of the carrot, and they would do their testing on the lower part, and then they would put those out and use those for doing their breeding. And flies will pollinate carrots, and you can put a mesh bag over them to keep them from cross pollinating or
right,
to
carrot
cross
tops.
once you want. Uh,
Go ahead.
yeah, you got carrot seeds, and I hate to say it, I've had poor luck with carrots most of my life, so I'm not a good carrot grower. Of all things, I've only had a few good plantings of carrots, probably because I don't put the effort into the carrots that they deserve. But I buy a bunch of carrot seeds, and I like to play with them, but I've never been happily rewarded with the carrots that I would hope for. Another spot to get seeds, as long as we're on that, is peppers. But
Yes.
don't do the green peppers. Do the ripe, colorful peppers, because
Okay.
green bell peppers are just peppers that aren't ripe. Look for the peppers that have developed color,
Like yellow
and
and
those will
red.
be, yep, yellow and red and orange. Those will be the ones that will have seeds available. So your hot peppers will be like that. Your yummy peppers, if you've seen those little snack peppers,
Yep.
someone may have started seeds from that. But it it's some yeah, those are all great sources for seeds. And other ones, cereal grains. Like that amaranth you have in the pantry, you can start that and use it as greens, or you can grow it for more amaranth.
Huh.
So yeah, this is stuff that I saved from last year. Uh, Even don't be afraid to, if you don't have anything, plant your dry beans out. Plant a row. You know, the stuff you just bought, you're very likely to have those grow and have more dry beans.
Now that's interesting. And everything that you're talking about, maybe the first year you go into gardening, you're going to buy your seeds or whatnot. But if you're smart about it in the future, you'll just reuse the seeds that you've harvested. So in that case, you're talking about bringing the cost down big time once you get started year after year. I'm sure you find little tricks and you take the money that you would have spent on seeds and maybe put it in towards the effort of your garden. So very, very good tips here, Jesse. I really appreciate this.
Right. And I do buy seeds every year, and I buy a decent amount. I mean, it's it's kind of fun. I mean, this year this is 1 ounce of cabbage seeds, late flat Dutch that I picked up this year. And shoot, this is 5 pounds of I think these are mammoth melting snow peas.
So what's that? What's a bag like that run?
Well, let's see. This year, let's see if I have a catalog here. At my local seed company, Jordan's in the Twin Cities. Peas. Okay, peas, edible pods, mammoth melting. I pay $2.85 a pound
Wow.
for this
So
bag.
$10. And how
Yeah,
many years is that what you're going to plant in one year or is that going to be multiple years?
this will be multiple years.
Nice.
I mean, this is good for 5, 6, 7
Wow.
years of planting. So, I mean, you can go all out, but it's fun to have that reserve. And stuff like lettuce seed that has a lower shelf life. So all my lettuce seed that I had from my first year of doing farmers market, it was all dead. Nothing germinated. I broke down and finally went out and bought fresh lettuce seed this year. But I had lettuce seed from back in 2009 that I had bought like 8 ounces of each variety of lettuce seed, and I was planting it. And I finally just got to the spot where it's like, okay, nothing's germinating. I need to buy more. And Other seeds are crazy how small they are. Let's see, I'm bookmarking a page with that. I went and they were on sale, and I bought five. Actually, I ended up double ordering. Bought 5,000 strawberry seeds, alpine strawberry seeds. This is 5,000 alpine strawberry seeds.
Goodness.
Yeah, so it's they're very, very small. I mean, they'll probably have a germination rate of like 60% and a low survival rate, but that little packet is 5,000 seeds.
Goodness.
So it's just the variability. And smaller the seed, lower the expected lifespan of the seed. The larger the seed, the longer the expected lifespan, because the size of the seed determines how much nutrients are in there. And and then there's also other factors like how hard the seeds are, actually how hard the seeds are, or how hard the anti-germination factors in the seeds are.
Right.
Because some of those have to be washed out, some of the coats have to be sclerified or damaged. Some of them take a freeze thaw or a whole winter. So those are all the details. But most vegetable seeds will be very straightforward to take from plants and start. But I do buy a lot of seeds. And I mean, one year I bought a seed catalog. I bought all the seeds in the seed catalog. And I bought a single packet of that. And you know what's sad? That is an entire seed catalog.
Wow.
That box right there.
That's not very big either.
No, but that's like 270 varieties of tomatoes, and like 170 varieties of peppers, 40 varieties of cucumbers,
Oh,
and
goodness.
a whole bunch of other miscellaneous. It was a specialty tomato catalog, but tomato pepper catalog. But that is all the packets that would be in a seed catalog. I mean, beans and that you'll have larger things, but yeah, that is basically all the seed that was available, buying one packet of each from one entire seed catalog.
Wow. So there you go, folks.
So
A little goes a long way, I guess, in this, because that doesn't look like a lot of seeds to me, but I'm sure it's several thousand in there.
oh yeah, there. Oh, let's see.
Hundreds of thousands.
Well, there would be, yeah, probably, yeah, somewhere between in the 30,000-40,000, because some of those packets only had like 12 seeds
Oh,
or
okay.
15 seeds in them or 100 seeds in them, and well, for about the price of a used ATV. So
There you go.
yeah, I mean, it's like some people ATV. I garden. I think that was $1,400 worth of seeds.
Oh my. Okay. Okay.
But there's all the specialty varieties in there. I mean, there's some seeds where you buy 10 seeds and you pay $5 for 10 seeds or even more. So it is
Jeez.
variable. So those peas were cheap, but some things,
Are a little more.
there's a purple asparagus right now, and an ounce of seeds is $50.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And some watermelons, yeah, an ounce of seed you're paying $100 for an ounce of seeds. So it's all
Okay.
the genetics, the variety, the work that it takes to make the cross pollination for your hybrid seeds, and don't discount hybrid seeds. And even if you have hybrid seeds, that is just the start of a breeding program. When you're working on new varieties, you actually make a cross, and the offspring of a cross of two different plants for making a new variety is a hybrid. And a hybrid is just a way to have traits from two parents in one plant. And you get more traits because you have more copies of different genes within that plant. So that's actually, hybrids are pretty cool and they're powerful, and they're start of a breeding program. So even if you have a hybrid, you can make a true line from a hybrid, and that's the start of every breeding program, is just crossing plants. So all a hybrid is the start of a breeding program for your own variety. So don't discount that. And for a lot of like fungal resistance and other environmental issues, those hybrids are a great place to start and to have some within your planting to avoid that. So I went and got some new hybrids that were just released this year to deal with cold and blights and that. And I think I'm planting about 30 or so, like 60-day or less tomato varieties. So I went through the catalog and went through what I had, and I went and found all the tomato varieties that were like less than 60 days, and I planted those out. So you can play with that, and there's a lot of room for working in there. And I'm also planting seeds that I have saved myself from varieties and that I've grown year after year. So don't get caught up in just one idea of how to do that. And we can edit this down into a whole bunch to a shorter thing and take what you want. But yeah, it's like that. It's a lot of fun. And some seeds I save for, I go to farmers market and I will buy stuff and I'll grow that. I have garlic cloves from last year's farmers market that I have planted out. Ground cherry. Basically the same family as the tomato and the tomatillo. And I just let the fruit dry down and I save the seeds out and plant those out.
There you go.
So there's plenty of things like that. And I bought the initial seeds from that. And once you plant ground cherries in a garden, you're always going to have ground cherries. Once you plant tomatillos in the garden, you're always going to have tomatillos.
Nice.
Yeah, because you're not going to be able to pick everything. And once the seeds get there, yeah, I dig up my seedlings for tomatillos from where they were the last year, and I transfer them to the spot they'll be this year. Because I'll work the garden up, tomatillos will come up, ground cherries will come up. I transplant them to the new spot. So there's plenty of these vegetables that once you get them in the garden, some of them stay in the garden.
Nice. That's good stuff. Well, Jesse, we really appreciate your time today. Like I said, we have barely gotten to the tip of the iceberg of this topic, and we hope you will join us again very soon.
Yeah, definitely. I've enjoyed that. You can see that I like to talk, and I'm very happy the puppies were nice and behaved. We have a whole litter of brand new puppies out there. So just a collie breed revival program of old-time Scotch collies, and we have 8 puppies.
Oh, goodness.
Maybe sometime in the future I'll share some puppy pics and such.
We'll do a puppy show, too. How about that?
Oh, my wife would love that.
All right, well, thanks for tuning in today, guys, to the Grand Solar Minimum, part of our growing series. We hope to hear from you again, guys. Until then, be safe, and we'll talk soon.
Do you like this show? Give us a thumbs up. Want to support us more? Share to your favorite social media platform. Buy a t-shirt or become a Patreon. All links are in the description below.